So I've always been fascinated by the word transition. And I remember first learning about it in relation to labour, and then at the birth of my first child, I experienced it for myself. And I remember at this time, suddenly everything felt really different. I became more aware, and it was almost like I was looking in on everything that was happening from the outside, and like time was almost standing still for a moment. But then suddenly this overwhelming fear crept in, and despite having had a really natural and straightforward labour, I felt like I couldn't do it anymore. I felt this resistance within me, and it all just felt really scary. But the midwife obviously recognised that this was a transition phase, and she knew this meant that I was nearly there. She didn't say anything, but I remember just seeing this knowing look in her eyes, and somehow this helped me to find my strength. And then suddenly I gave birth, and that's when I became a mum. And looking back now, I realise that this moment of fear was that moment when I was suddenly on the edge of this massive shift from maiden to mother, moving into a territory that was completely unknown to me. And I was in this transition between the known and the unknown, which was something both completely terrifying, yet also magical and amazing at the same time. So when I gave birth to my second child, I was able then to recognise this feeling, and so I could see it differently. And I think while any transition can be scary, I think I find that recognising what the fear is, being able to see this as kind of like a resistance to change, and recognising the significance of this change as well, and giving this moment the respect that it deserves, and learning to surrender to it somehow makes it a little easier to move through. And I feel now I can recognise this in many moments in my life too, when moving into or giving birth to something new, or when I'm myself letting go of a version of myself and moving into who I'm becoming. There's always that time just before this time of transition, like the space between two things. It's just about when things are about to change, and it can feel really unsettling because you know you've got to let go before you can move into what's next. It's like we're having to grieve what we're leaving behind and have faith in what we're moving forward into without really fully knowing what this is yet. And this is really scary. And our ego just wants to keep us safe, and the unknown can feel dangerous simply because it's unknown. So it's normal to feel resistance and fear in these times of transition. But there can also be something really beautiful about this time, this space between where time almost stands still. And to me, it feels like a sacred space. And I also feel really honoured to have been able to witness and support people through this stage when they've come to the end of their lives. And I feel that having seen people being able to surrender to this transition has really inspired me, as well as completely changing the way that I feel about life and death. We go through many births, deaths, and transitions over the course of our lives, and I think if we recognise them, they can be really powerful. And I wonder if perhaps learning to recognise these times of transition and being more open about them can not only help us to embrace change and open up to our true potential, but maybe even support us in preparing for how we do approach our final transition. And I know that perimenopause is one of these times, and I can feel the magic within it, the sacredness and the feeling of time standing still, but also within it, this fear of having to let go and move into the unknown. And it feels like we need to just be able to be with all of this, to slow down so that we can recognise this time as sacred, but also to sit with the fear and accept that as an important part of it all too. And I've worked with lots of women over the past few years for support at perimenopause. And despite having learnt so much about ways to physically support our bodies and hormone balance, which I know is really important too, and can be a way of supporting ourselves through all of the emotional and spiritual side, I felt that what most women have felt they needed was to have this space and to be held and supported away from all the roles and responsibilities and expectations, to be able to go deep and surrender to this transformation that's occurring within themselves. And it also feels really special to have been there with these women and to have witnessed them surrender to this process, working on the fear, the grief, and all of the emotions that have come up, as well as facing all that has needed to be let go of before moving on to the next phase. It's been really inspirational, especially to see the transformation that they've gone through as a result. Because of rites of passage, if we do process the last stages of our life and let go of for the things that we need to, it means we can move on into our power and into the next stage, be feeling more healed and whole. And I guess life can be a series of transitions, and we choose to work with these, moving through the fear, moving through the resistance, constantly being reborn into the next versions of ourselves, if we choose to see it like this. We can also choose to stay stuck and numb the fear and ignore it, but I feel that in doing so, we'd just be missing out on so much. These big transitions like birth, rites of passage, and even death, if we see it like this, I think can be seen as magical and sacred times where we can learn about the cyclical nature of our lives and practicing surrendering to the fluidity of everything, letting go, feeling that primal life force that's ultimately underneath it all, guiding us through if we'll allow it. And the more we can practice surrendering to it, maybe the less scary it becomes, and the more we can begin to allow our own expansion. To realise that we're all part of everything, nothing lasts forever, everything is forever changing, and then we can really allow the magic in.